Okay, Articles of Confederation Part 2. Accomplishments, two of them by the Articles government and the third one just by the Articles themselves. There were two legislative acts, only two significant ones that the Articles Congress ever managed to do. They both had to do with the Northwest Territory, as it came to be called. That would be the present-day states of Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin, approximately. Okay? The Land Ordinance of 1785 made official what most people had expected. The land in the Old Northwest would be surveyed and sold at auction to the highest bidder, and that would create an independent revenue stream for Congress eventually. So, the surveying would be done starting on the eastern boundary of Ohio, boundary between Ohio and Pennsylvania, and the land would be surveyed into precisely square blocks 6 miles on a side. That would be 36 square miles. They were to be called townships. Same word as one used 200 years earlier in New England. That'd be 36 square miles. Each square mile section, 1 mile on the side, is called a section. Okay? A section happens to be 640 acres. And eventually, someone could buy or acquire a portion of that. Let me think. 160 acres is a quarter of a section, and so on down. In that area, you probably still find land divided up that way: 40 acres, 80, 160, 320, 640. The part of Texas I grew up in, people didn't refer to their land in terms of acres. They referred to them as sections. And it took 6 or 8 of them just to be viable. It's pretty arid out there. The Texas Outback, I call it. Okay, I've got to stop whispering here. Anyway, then there would be vertical ranges of townships, and by reference to which range, which township, which parcel within a town, which section within a township such as that, you could pinpoint precise locations of land. Okay. Now, start auctioning off the land of the highest bidder. Now, Congress is balancing, they're doing a balancing act here because they have to have the revenue from the land sales, but they don't really want to encourage a bunch of people to pick up and move out there, because if there's just a stampede of mass movement into the Northwest Territory, that's going to stagnate population growth in the earlier existing states, and that in turn will stagnate their economy. So a westward movement, or the prospect of one, is not a grand and glorious thing for the original 13 states, then or later. So the land was sold. I think the minimum purchase was a section. You couldn't buy, they wouldn't sell you less than 640 acres of land. And I think the opening bid was $2 an acre. If the supplement said something different, go with that. Should have looked at it. Don't carry this stuff around the tip of my tongue. And you could pay for it. You could pay for it with continental currency. The worthless old continentals, they'd take that stuff because they've got an almost limitless amount of land, and this helps retire that debt. Okay, they've repaid part of the national debt in land by doing that. Anyway, this initiates something that's going to go back and forth as a hotly contested political football for the next almost 80 years. They referred to it as land policy, and that would be whatever the current policies were for selling land to the public. Now, selling it with a high minimum purchase like that it means most of the land is not going to be bought by people who want to move out west and establish themselves and become farmers. They can't afford to do that. If they go legal, of course. There are other ways. Back and forth, Westerners eventually get some political clout. They're in the political ball game. Westerners generally wanted a liberal land policy where they want to reduce the minimum purchase. They want to make it easier to pay it back, that kind of thing. Whereas the original states tended to want a tougher land policy with a high minimum purchase, so that the land is not going to be sold by pioneers who want to go out there and live, but mainly to speculators. And that was the deal. Speculators, these are people who buy something at a low price hoping to sell it later at a high price, just because the value went up for some reason. Speculators will be buying most of the land, and they're not going to move out west themselves, probably. Okay, now in reality, there was something of a stampede because just the atmosphere of the revolution and riots and all of that, it was hard to explain to a lot of small farmer type people that you're really supposed to buy the land. They couldn't afford to anyway. They just thought that's part of the, what we won in the war, and they just move out there and pick out some land and start farming without reference. They neither knew nor cared that some speculator somewhere had title to the land. So this sparked some almost continuous lively court battles as the technical owner of the land shows up and tries to evict or charge a payment from the people who had just moved out there without bothering to buy the land. So, Land Ordinance of 1785. Problem got to be that I'm overlapping here because it just QuickTime quit on me, so I had to save that and start again. They didn't bother with buying it, they just moved out there. So this is going to lead to some dirt level conflict over the years because farmers go out there, they put in a lot of sweat equity, they clear the land, they start their farms, only to learn that some rich speculator actually technically owns the land. And so there you go. There's probably more people just moved out there because they wanted to and didn't actually bother to pay for the land. Well, anyway, the sections within a township would be numbered, and the proceeds from section 16, a particular parcel of land, would be used to support a school for the people that lived in that township. All right, 2 years later, Congress enacted the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. They did that even as the Constitution writers down in Philadelphia were hammering together the coffin of the Articles. The Articles government met in New York City, our original capital, or during that time. Philadelphia had been unofficially before. Now, what this did was provide a system whereby territories could be created and eventually achieve statehood on a completely equal footing. All right, just three-stage procedure. The area would be divided up into a number of territories. It turned out there were 5 of them that became the modern states of Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And until the population reached 20,000 taxpayers, the government would consist of a governor appointed by Congress, and they carried this over after the Constitution would later be appointed by the president, and a couple of judges. That'd be it. Now, the 20,000 taxpayers, that's going to be, at the peak, that's about as many people as you find in maybe Cleveland or something. It's fewer than there are in Parker County, spread out over an area the size of Ohio. Once the population reaches a threshold of 20,000 taxpayers, and remember, only property-owning men were taxpayers, then you could move on to the next phase, which would be organized territory. With Congress's permission, they could convene a convention, a territorial convention, which would draft a proposed state constitution, which they would then submit to the voters of the state in a referendum. If it passes, then the proposed constitution itself is forwarded to Congress, and Congress would check it out, and Congress, finding no objection, they would adopt a resolution of the 2 houses called an act of admission, and voila, the territory has become a state. on a fully equal footing with the other states. What's important about that? Just this. Um, what if Congress, during the Articles and after, had decided just to hold that area in subjection like a colonial possession? Some people wanted to do that. Now, these original states thought of themselves as the United States. Did some people not foresee that the bigger this thing gets, the more they are going to become marginalized and maybe run over by mammoth states yet to be created? Okay, that was 1787. The third achievement is not one of the Articles of Government, but of the Articles themselves. The Articles of Confederation comprise a very necessary transition phase. At the time they were written and accepted, that was the strongest government that had any chance of being accepted. All right, we didn't really want a central government. Nobody is envisioning a centralized United States that would be at all unitary. It would be a loose, non-binding alliance of independent states. Illustration, not all the states had governors. At least 4 of them had presidents. You get it? Benjamin Franklin was the president of Pennsylvania, and so on. All right. But what the Articles gave us during its brief 7.5-year existence was a sort of kick in the teeth experience of what it's like to live under a government that's too weak. Today, we struggle with one that is arguably too strong. That one was too weak. There's problems both ways. A government that is too weak to do anything to you is also too weak to do anything for you. So, as we'll see, I'm going to punt this to the supplements because I'd have to add a third part. If I didn't, and I am out of time on this to do videos. We had foreign policy problems out the wazoo. We got problems with Britain. They're waging economic warfare against us. Problems with France. They're shaking us down for the money we owe them. Got problems with Spain because they threatened to close off access to the Port of New Orleans, which is the on-off switch for economic development west of the Appalachian Mountains. It all has to flow down the river system to New Orleans. And we got problems with pirate city-states in North Africa, which make it very dangerous for our ships to enter the Mediterranean. Read up on that in the supplements. We got domestic problems. The states can't settle disputes among themselves. You had an armed uprising in western Massachusetts in 1786 called Shays' Rebellion. And I'm going to tell you, if I'd been a farmer in Massachusetts in 1786, I'd have been out there with them. You might too. Read about that stuff in the supplement. So that's what I'm going to do for you on Articles of Confederation. So we'll put this together now. One more little thing here, obviously added later. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787, interestingly, forbade slavery in that area. Okay, what was now, for some people, slavery was already a moral issue, but there are not very many of them. Probably the most prominent, highly placed abolitionist, and the only abolitionist among the founders, was Alexander Hamilton. We're just getting ready to talk about him. He has many other things to his credit as well. But the area here, the thing about not abolishing, but forbidding slavery, it was already well known that wherever slavery existed, the slave-owning class had a complete, overwhelming, prohibitive advantage in everything. They dominated the government, they dominated society, they dominated everything. So you don't want that. That would make the area less attractive. This seems like I'm contradicting myself a little bit, but long run, you wouldn't have as many small farmers willing to move into that area, and eventually they know they're going to have that. Slavery will rise as a moral issue long after it existed as a class issue at this point. Late 1780s, it's more of a class issue. So I thought I'd add that on there, clarify that, and now I'm going to start recording videos about the Constitutional Convention, which is as important as anything I'm going to tell you about.